Okay. Hi, Michael. How are you today?
Hey there, Amy. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good as well. So, as people come in, I want to introduce Michael A. Bryan to my left or right. He is in charge of Oraculos School of Astrology. Um, this is the first time I've had Michael on my channel, so I am looking forward to getting to know him. We spoke briefly before we went online, but I'm fully going to get to know him here live and also offline as well when we talk after the live. So he's going to be here with us for an hour and a half. Any questions that you may have, feel free to ask. But this episode's just to get to know Michael, where he's come from his practice to where he is now, what he has to offer, and just for him to share insight about astrology, what it means for him, and what his intention is to share it with other people. So I'm going to let you hold the platform. So I hope you didn't do too much talking today, but I think you did because you had a course earlier. But you have the platform, okay? And I'll throw in questions along the way. So my first one to you, Michael, is tell us how you got into your practice, period. Your practice being your spiritual practice or anything that led you to where you are right now.
Awesome. So that's a huge question. And but me, I got into my practice by it was tarot, I think.
Go first.
Actually, let me just step back and give a more well-rounded introduction to this. Around the age of 12 years old, I got into everything that I do today. I was telling someone the story the other day that I grew up in the early 2000s, and so there was a lot going on TV at the time in terms of shows about witchcraft and the occult and paganism, and all of these stuff was just always on TV. And I found my desire to learn more about things that were magical and mystical coming from watching shows like Charmed or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, even though not so much Buffy, but
Yeah.
uh, and then afterwards, J.K. Rowling came out with her series of books, the Harry Potter series, and I think that that for me was really a major launch pad into a desire to live more fully, more magically, more everything from a place of depth. Now, at the time, the only magical contact I had was Harry Potter and the other shows that came on TV. So I had no idea that there was a more grounded approach to spirituality or that there was a more grounded approach to magical studies than that.
Mm.
And I mean, I grew up in the Bible Belt of the Caribbean. I was young, I was black, I was gay, I was into magic. And so all of these things really were not necessarily, they didn't ostracize me from my community, but they definitely made it more difficult for me to connect with people about the things that I loved because I automatically found that when I spoke about it, it was like, no, that's not real. You know, stop talking about that. Especially within the context of a lot of the friends that I had, because I went to a Seventh-day Adventist uh, preschool, primary school, high school, university, everything within my life was very much based in the Adventist church. And so it was difficult for me to really find points of connection. So I had to teach myself everything that I know. And I started, to my great fortune, my first two contact points with anything mystical or magical was the tarot, was the Kabbalistic tarot specifically.
That was
Uh,
your first deck?
mm,
That was your first deck?
well, actually my first deck, my only deck. I only have two decks. I have the Rider Waite deck and the Universal Waite deck. That's the first deck I ever got. And then I have the Aleister Crowley deck as well. And so those are the only two tarot decks I use
Okay.
at all. And use is an interesting word because I use the Crowley deck for myself when I'm doing my own tarot reading for me, but I use the Rider-Waite deck for all of my other clients.
Okay. It holds, obviously, because of the intensity of the Crowley Duff deck, holds a lot. It's not an easy read for a lot of clients, you know.
Yeah. And I think that it also, to make it more accessible for the clients in terms of just the imagery, I think the Rider-Waite deck just provides a lot more. I think Arthur Edward Waite at some point in time said that I'm making this deck because people are interested in the tarot and I want to give them something that they can use. So
Yeah.
it was like the deck that we use as the Rider-Waite deck was his version of like a starter deck. But in general, I think it is a marvelous deck because it gives people the ability to really sink into the imagery, whereas the Crowley deck requires people to know that much more about the Kabbalah and astrology and magic. And for a lot of people, that's just way beyond their pay grade.
Did it seem like a natural progression? Did you go from the Waite to the Crowley deck?
Yeah. I mean,
Give or take.
in using the Waite deck, I wanted to study Kabbalah. I just wanted for that to be what I was doing, and so I studied Kabbalah. And then afterwards, I felt like it would make more sense for me to have a deck that more specifically and explicitly had the Kabbalistic themes on each card. So in that regard, I used to buy books on the Crowley deck and use those books as an interpretive guide to the Rider-Waite deck, because I think still growing up as a kid, the Crowley deck seemed it was a little bit intimidating. And I don't think it was intimidating because of the deck. I think it was intimidating because of the man. And now today, I'm just deeply in love with Aleister Crowley as a person. I think that he was amazing. I think he was very satirical. I think he was misunderstood. And a lot of that was because he just wasn't the best PR person for himself.
Yeah,
But yeah, I love a lot of his writings on things, specifically in terms of Kabbalah. I think he was a genius.
I agree with you. I know there's quite a few people, though, in the tarot community that don't like him as an individual, but his deck is right there, the tops for them. I have Lon Milo Duquette's, Understanding Aleister Crowley. That was the first book I got. I did have the Doff deck first, and then I got that deck, and I got to meet Lon Duquette, and he is just as humorous, not as satirical as Crowley, but the reading from Duquette explaining Crowley, the humor between the way Crowley is and him, it meshed very well. Saying yesterday that in spite of how some people think he was mad, that Crowley was mad, I'd be interested just to be in a room with him and just let him talk and hear what he has to say. You may not have to like the person, but I sometimes feel the more eccentric, the more matter, M-A-D-E-R, an individual is, they have some of these brilliant ideas that just changes the whole thing. And that's what I like. I like people to turn things up on end. And that keeps it interesting. So that's part of how I got to the Doff Tarot. But I did pass that deck down a few years ago. But anyhow, back to you. So from how much time did you spend working with the Doff deck and then going to practice the Kabbalah?
Well, first of all, I want to say I love that you've been in contact with Lon. Lon is a wonderful friend of mine, and we've spoken on and off for years about really Aleister Crowley's contributions to astrology specifically, because Aleister Crowley was the ghostwriter for a very famous American astrologer, Evangeline Adams. And so
I know the book.
Yeah. So a lot of her writing was actually him writing it, which I think was really interesting because it said that he was completely aware and well versed in the astrology of the early 1920s. Now, even though a lot of us in the traditional astrology community don't really think the astrology of the early 1920s is really a valid representation of great astrology per se, it just for what they were doing in the 1920s, he was a master of it. And so I think that that's also great to know because he was just as much an astrologer as he was a magician or a Kabbalist or a tarot. I won't say reader. I don't think he ever gave a tarot reading in his life, but he was a tarot practitioner because at that time there was also two different factions. You could be a tarot reader or you could be a tarot philosopher slash student slash mystic. And I think that he was more of the philosophy slash studentship path as opposed to actually giving people tarot readings.
Well, he was part of the Golden Dawn, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
He's like the Lucifer of the Golden Dawn. He got kicked
Mm-hmm.
out or he left or whatever. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm going to show you. And
Mm-hmm.
then he did. And I think the same with weight, right? He was part, and then it's like this little Jacob's ladder of some sort of
Mm-hmm.
people finding they take the courses or they hear the teachings and they're like, you know what, I got something that's even better, and everyone just starts splintering off right around that time.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. But how soon after did you work into the Kabbalah? Because I want to touch upon that a bit.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the Kabbalah came into my life very early within my tarot journey because I think I owned The Idiot's Guide to Tarot. And I mean, that was like a very brief moment within my tarot career. But very quickly after that, I started to inherit a lot of these very old tarot books. I mean, Robert Wang's book was one of the first books I had on the tarot, the Kabbalistic tarot, and then Gareth Knight, and then all of these books by Israel Regardie, and then all of the book by the Ciceros, and so I quickly realized that I wanted to be on the Kabbalistic path, and I just dove deep into that. I mean, when I was 16 years old, I basically had every Kabbalistic tarot adjacent book that I could have, and I would go to the printer at my university and I just print out the entire book because there's this website, I think it's called Scribd or scribds.com. And I would just type in Kabbalah and whatever came up, I would just print out these books. So Paul Foster Case, for example, was a huge influence on me growing up in terms of a lot of his writings, and the builders of the Adytum and their entire tarot course was really pivotal to me. And I never did the course because I think as a kid, at 16, it seemed daunting that I would do a course that would be one card a month or I can't even remember what the length of time is, but I just was already giving professional readings by the time I was 16. I've been giving professional readings by the time I was 15. I was giving professional readings from I was 14 in terms of people actually coming to me and paying me money and exchanging money with me for a reading. So I didn't want to backtrack and do a course from scratch that would start me with the Fool, and then once a month I'd receive the next lesson for the next card. But I think today I would, at this age and stage in life, I would very gladly do their course, even though I've read all their books already.
You probably don't need the course then. If you read the books,
I
you build up your own perception of, right?
That's true, but I think the older I get, the more satisfied I am with the way how people choose to organize their information and the way how people choose to teach their information. So I'm at the moment I'm doing a Vedic palmistry course, and I've studied palmistry for about as long as I've studied tarot or astrology because once again, very early on, I was working in a thrift store and my job was to organize all of the books for the summer. And then she gave me all the books I wanted. and there was a palmistry book in there by Dylan Warren Davis called The Hand Reveals. And it's interesting because 20 years later, I ended up hiring Dylan Warren Davis to teach palmistry to my students at Oraculos. And what do you say?
Oh, I said, look at that. Full circle.
Yeah, I mean, but his book was the book that, and I'm so grateful for his book because his book. Are you familiar with like the palmistry world?
The lines, I have to look at a book.
Yeah.
I have no practice.
Yeah.
Not an interest, but I don't have a practice in palmistry.
Well, his book was a wonderful bridge for me because it was heavily rooted not in Kabbalah specifically, but in Hermeticism. And you know, the whole thing with the Golden Dawn is they created the Hermetic Kabbalah or the Hermetic Kabbalah. And so the Hermetic streams within his book just tied together a lot of things for me in terms of what I was doing with the Hermetic Tarot, what I was doing with Hermeticism as a standalone study. So I'm saying all of this to basically say that I have always been aware of palmistry and the lines and everything, but I'm doing a Vedic palmistry course from scratch, an Indian palmistry course with a teacher in India, well, two teachers in India, because I enjoy also being a person who has a school. Like I have a school where I teach people from level 0. I enjoy seeing how other people structure their level 0 education because I think that that's where I learn the most. I don't really learn anything from somebody's advanced class because more than likely I can do whatever they're teaching in their advanced class.
Yeah.
I learn the most from how someone structures their information to teach a beginner student.
Yeah, you need to have a good teacher, period.
Yeah.
That they know that they are versed in the information, and that also very importantly, they can communicate it clearly so that it makes sense. Because you know, when going to college or whatnot, there's always a teacher that someone's going to complain about because it's an interesting course, but the way that they teach it just makes it very difficult. And I know that's happened to me in like 1 or 2 classes. It's like, it's exciting, but I don't get it. Is it me or is it the teacher? So it's very important to have that communication. I totally get that. I want to, let's hold where we are here, but I want to jump back a little bit because I want to keep track of time because there is so much I want to talk to you about. I want people to know. Okay, so Harry Potter was more or less the thing that kind of triggered it, but did you have any family influences? Was there a pastor in your family, anything that you were exposed to religious-wise that just maybe not directly, but just kind of influenced you somehow, maybe inherently? Answer, uncles.
I think that what did I just do? Can
No,
you still see me? Okay, I think I pressed the button and something happened. Anyway, what I was saying was that a pastor, no. Well, interestingly, my grandfather, my biological grandfather, which I only discovered later in life, I think probably around the age of 25 years old, he was an Anglican priest, but when I was introduced to his library, a lot of the books that he had were books that I either had at one point in time been interested in purchasing from an occult studies perspective, or were books that I would have purchased in any event.
Okay.
So he had books on astrology, he had books on mysticism, he had books on shamanism, he had books on Hinduism. And not only did he have these books, but these books he also wrote his name on the spine of all of them. And he also made underlines, you know, he had underlines for the books and he was writing in the margins his thoughts. And so he wasn't just some Anglican priest reading these books and just throwing them away. Like he genuinely was curious about things of a mystical, astrological, magical nature. And interestingly, he would also write the year that he started reading the book on the spine. And around he died when I was about 4 years old, I think. And all of these books that he had on mysticism and magic and astrology, he was reading them within the same period of years. And it was right after I was born, up until about 3 years after I was born. Like, these were the books he was reading. And so I found that to be very interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But I mean, independent of that, and then his wife did energy healing. She was a physical therapist, but she also did energy healing, and
Mhm.
she was the head is the is was the head of physical therapy in the Bahamas or the Caribbean or something, and she was an energy healer. And so one of the books, I think what's the lady's name, Barbara Brennan or something,
I don't
who
know. I don't know the name, sorry.
she wrote this book called Hands of Light, and I think her name is Barbara Brennan. And that was also a book that I was very interested in when I was in university, and I was interested in going to Florida to study with the lady. And then when I got introduced to my biological grandparents' library, she was an energy healer. She had this energy healing book that she also made notes in, and he had this entire bookshelf full of mystical, magical books. And so it was very interesting because it felt like there was a piece that was somewhere in my DNA that
Yep.
I wasn't aware of. But when I found it, I was like, oh, wow, okay, so this makes sense.
Mhm. No, we just as soon as you started telling me what he was reading, it's just like, it's right there.
Mhm,
It is
mhm,
right there, you
mhm.
know? And your parents never told you?
Well,
You told your wife?
my mother, my so my parents were never married. They were never married. I don't even know if they were really in a relationship. I think they tried to have a relationship, but they were never in a relationship. So my mother, I always knew my biological father because their family was a very prominent Bahamian family, and he was going off to law school, and his father was this Anglican priest, and everybody knows their family. And they basically lived right across the road from my mother and her family, and so I always was aware of who they were. But I,
Oh,
but I had spoken to him a couple times as a kid, but I'd never actually gone into the house.
okay.
And and then my mother got married to who I call my father, but he's my stepfather, but she got
Mhm.
married when I was 5 years old. So there was never a need for me to know what went on in the
Okay.
house next door or who those people were. And only later in life, because my biological father's siblings wanted to make a connection with me, that's kind of how we know each other. But I never had to know them, or it just was never part of my consciousness.
Okay. Okay. It comes to you when things need to be revealed, they'll just show up in their own way. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I was fascinated to see how this strong desire to explore the unknown came.
Mhm.
And obviously it was a trigger. You know, you saw Harry Potter and it's just like, oh, I kind of like that.
Mhm.
And I have a cousin, she's passed on. I had a cousin, but in this realm,
Mhm.
she she turned me on to horror movies
Mm.
and the occult. She didn't practice, but she liked that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And she's a very nurturing person. She's almost like a second mom to me. She knew me
Mhm.
when I was a baby. And as I grew older and I watched horror movies and things of the unknown, ghosts, haunted things, so on and so forth, those topics made sense to me. There's
Mhm.
an interest. It's like there's something here that I got to look in. And so as I
Mhm.
got older, I just one thing led to another. And then eventually it fell into tarot. So that's what I'm saying. I think there's when people can't explain why they're interested in something that's so out of
Mhm.
the ordinary, it's usually a trigger. You know,
Mhm.
it's something that you see or a conversation that's and what someone says, it's just like, how come I need to follow up on this? So
Mhm.
that was a good message, Harry Potter, you did well. J.K. Rowling's.
I think
Um,
so.
okay, so we got this chunk of your life here. Obviously, did you have any interest in anything else before following astrology? You mentioned was it your father went into law? Your biological father went?
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a scholarly influence to become a doctor or anything like that? Or did you follow this path?
Yeah. That's so early on in life, I wanted to become a dancer. I wanted to study dance professionally. And I got the opportunity to do that in Jamaica when I went to university. And I feel like whatever dance I did in the Bahamas before Jamaica was pretty limited. But
Mhm.
I went to university at a very young age. So I, still was, I think I was 15 going on to 16. I just turned 16, and that's when I went off to school.
Wow.
And so I got a chance to dance for many years up until I moved. I danced in Jamaica for 5 years, and then after I danced in Jamaica, I moved to Cuba. And Cuba is where I got the most rigorous and structured dance education of my life. And I continue to work with not a lot of the, but I continue to work with some of the teachers and choreographers from Cuba who taught at the company that I wanted to work for. And so I continue to do that work today
Okay.
with them. But dance, I think if I had to pinpoint, I mean, when I was younger, I wanted to be a veterinarian. That was kind of a thing I wanted to do. And then much later, I thought about going to medical school, especially as a result of a lot of the medical yoga work I was doing and a lot of the medical astrology I
Mhm.
was doing as well. I wanted to go to med school to solidify it, and I did a bit of that. I did a few pre-med courses, but I also run a full-time astrology school. I also run a full-time diploma program. I also meet clients all the time. I give readings, I have a podcast, I travel, I teach, I write books. And so going to medical school just became unreasonable, especially because I knew that in going to medical school, I was kind of just doing it to see how far I could go before I had to let it go because I
Yeah.
think I knew that it just wasn't a realistic thing for me. But I have one more book. Well, I don't have one more book to write. I have 7 more books to write, but I'm currently in the process of writing the next book. And I do feel like with the more books I write, the more I write, the smaller the books will get, I believe. And until I'm writing the final book, and I think after I'm done writing my books, then I'll think about what my life looks like and whether or not I want to do something more medically focused in the future. But
Oh,
but those were my specific paths. It was
okay.
dance, 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 and it still is dance to a very large degree. I dance. I have a rigorous professional dance class, like 2.5 hours of dance every day, and then an hour and a half of Iyengar yoga after that. And so my life is really revolving around that in the morning, and then in
Mhm.
the afternoon, that's dedicated to my astrology and my tarot practice.
Wow, you are extremely structured. I mean, you took the word, you said the word, and I had to take it. It's just everything has a place, but it feels like it's right where you need to be, correct?
Yeah, and I think that
Yes.
when it comes to, I'm really not structured. I mean, I'm extraordinarily structured
Work-wise.
when it comes to how I teach and how I deliver information to my students. I'm extraordinarily structured. I have a clear sense of my beginning, my middle, and my end. I know exactly how I'm going to impart education. If I'm turning someone into a professional astrologer, I know what that looks like and how that should be done, and I do it very well. So in that regard, I have a very clear system. But when it comes to everything else I do, the only thing that keeps me committed to doing the 2 dance classes a day, for example, is because I paid for them already.
Okay.
So I think that, I've already put money into this. I need to wake up at 7 a.m. I need to do the first class from 7 to 8. Then the next class starts at 8:15 to 9:30. Then my yoga class starts from 9:30 to 11. And the yoga class, because I'm teaching it, I don't have the opportunity to not show up to it. So I teach the class, but I also take the class so that I know for a fact I have 3.5 hours of just movement. on a
Mhm.
daily basis.
You're taking words that I want to say before I actually get to them. There's it seems like what's really important is you do have an order, you do have a structure in the way that you do your work, because
Mm,
that's the way you function and that's the way that you could get things done,
mhm,
in a certain manner. But movement's very important, whether it is dance, whether it's movement of study,
mm,
of moving the intellect, all
mm,
that influences us inside as well. And
mm,
that's what I'm seeing and feeling from you, because you're following things almost naturally. That
mm,
makes sense. It's like you're exploring this, you're doing yoga. There's something that involves with the inner healing,
mhm,
and you're finding these things that are like hits. They're like, okay, this works for me.
mm,
Let's go with this as far as we can, and then if it goes into another level, you just go with it. So
definitely.
that's you're very. I have to say, you're very lucky to have that, because a lot of people, they feel things and they think it's where it needs to be or where they need to be, and it's not. And then they go all over the place, and there's no order. There's nothing that's leading from one to another. And I
Mhm,
think the problem is you lose the focus. There's a lack of intention when it comes to something. You have to make a commitment once you're finding something, and it grows into one and into
mhm.
the another, because you never know what's going to be at the end, like you were saying. Who knows, you may do astrology for the rest of life, or you may end up doing something else. We don't know.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So it's important to follow your heart, you
Mm,
know, and act accordingly. Okay, so we got Mychal. We got Mychal's background already out in the open. So let's just jump right ahead to astrology. So astrology was already part of this journey, and
yeah.
it seems like maybe it came up maybe around the time of the Kabbalah, or did you feel a little bit later? Were there some courses that you took specifically that you felt this is where I need to spend my time in the most?
Hmm. I think the Kabbalah came up for me before the astrology. I already had that framework in my mind before the astrology started, and it wasn't that far before it, but it definitely was the framework, and then I projected the astrology onto that. And whenever I learn something, I want to learn it thoroughly. So I wasn't just satisfied to learn the Golden Dawn version of what they said
Mhm.
Kabbalah was. I wanted to also specifically learn Orthodox Jewish Kabbalah. So I went full throttle into that, and I became a Jewish religious scribe. I studied Hebrew, so I learned all of the rules and all of the laws for writing the letters properly
Mhm.
in Hebrew, of the Hebrew alphabet, and how to do that in terms of writing religious documents. And I studied with a rabbi, and I studied with another scribe, and so that's I, a great part of my life is really caught up within Hebrew mysticism, and not just from the Western mystery tradition of the Golden Dawn or Paul Foster Case or Aleister Crowley, but literally because I studied with people who live in Jerusalem, and I learned about the Bible through their perspective, and I learned about the Hebrew alphabet through their perspective, so that I would have a more rounded understanding of Western mysticism in general,
Yeah.
because I could, in reading some of the books like Paul Foster Case's books and Aleister Crowley books, and just hearing and seeing some of the things they did, something in my mind said, wait, these people don't speak any Hebrew. They actually don't quite know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I learned Hebrew so that I could understand what they were trying to angle towards in a more deeper, more felt way.
Yeah. Um, Ian, who is IA here, have you visited Israel? Have you spent time?
Me,
Yes.
I haven't visited Israel, but my partner is Israeli,
Okay.
and have I studied Hebrew for years, basically. As soon as I got into the tarot, I started studying Hebrew. But then I specifically spent the last 3 years intensively studying Hebrew in school. And then I dropped that for a bit because I wanted to focus on writing. But my entire life for the last 3 years has been just wrapped up in Judaism and Hebrew.
Wow. I wish I could stop saying wow. I mean, just your journey is, oh my God, your journey is something very, very inspiring. Like I said, this is all new for me. So I'm getting to know you, and I appreciate you opening up and sharing your background. And I think it is important as an individual to go out and explore, go out and travel, try different things, meet different people. You definitely grow in that sense. You become more cultured and maybe a little bit more patient with things when you see things in another lens. You have to expand your horizons, go beyond it, challenge yourself. Did you see the question, the comment?
Oh no, I didn't. How can
This is my friend Ian.
Let me. I'm technologically challenged. Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's on the StreamYard.
Okay. Yes. Now I see it. Okay, got it.
And then one more for you, Ian.
Yep. Definitely.
Oh my God. All right, so let's now focus on the astrology. Okay, so we got the backdrop of the tarot and where you came, and now we're in astrology. So it does seem like the tarot and astrology for you came hand in hand. It was like almost a natural progression to move from one into the other. So we have the term, I'm just going to jump into it to fast forward a little bit. You coin, I don't know if you did officially coin it, Uranian astrology. Okay. I'm going to be silly and just be layman. Is this making reference to the influence of Uranus?
No.
No. Okay. Okay.
Definitely not.
You can laugh. It looks obvious.
Yeah. Uranian astrology is over 100 years old, and it was founded in Germany by a surveyor by the name of Alfred Witte. And Alfred Witte founded, well, he didn't, he was the main proponent of the school that was called the Hamburg School of Astrology. And when the Hamburg School of Astrology came to America, it came to America just after the war. And so things in Germany weren't really, German-American relations were very tense. And so one of the people who brought Uranian astrology to America felt as if Americans would be very anti-Uranian astrology if they knew it was completely German. So he changed the name from the Hamburg School of Astrology, because clearly if it's from Hamburg, it's from Germany. So he changed the name from the Hamburg School of Astrology to the Uranian System of Astrology, because the acronyms for that is USA. And he thought that Americans would be more amenable to something named after themselves than something named after a place in Germany, basically. So that's the Iranian system of astrology, and it is the cornerstone of Iranian astrology. Is the only genuinely new system of astrology to be created in probably 2,000 years, because every other system of astrology follows the same pattern of signs, planets, aspects, houses. But Iranian astrology lets go this notion of the signs of the zodiac being causal factors by themselves, and it lets go of this notion of the houses, because everybody has a house system that they enjoy. Some people enjoy Placida, some people enjoy Regiomontana, some people enjoy whole sign houses. Everybody has a sign, a house system that they prefer to use. And so Uranian astrology throws away the houses, it throws away the signs of the zodiac, it throws away what else does it throw away? It throws away,
Planets?
no, the planets are the point. I think that that's actually the point of Uranian astrology. The planets are the point, and the planets are the only actual causal factors that exist within the cosmos. And so Uranian astrology maintains aspects and planets, but even within that, we're only using the aspects of manifestation, which are the hard aspects, so the squares, the oppositions, and smaller versions of that, because Uranian astrology is focused on events and on predicting events. So there's a very strong predictive element of Uranian astrology. So event prediction, but also describing to a person the concrete and the specific events that have occurred within their lives that have made them exactly who they are. So that's the Uranian orientation. It's very popular in, well, the knockoff of Uranian astrology is called cosmobiology, and it's very popular in the UK. And in the 70s and the 80s, Uranian astrology and cosmobiology were very popular everywhere in the world. And today, I mean, a lot of people don't know about Uranian astrology because there's been such a big revival of traditional astrology, which I'm a part of that revival. I'm one of the people reviving traditional astrology. But Iranian astrology is 100 years old. It's very well known. It's very respected. And a lot of us are trying to bring Iranian astrology back to the forefront more strongly because it is such a rich and powerful system of astrology.
It's part of the traditional astrology, like it's a sub part of traditional astrology, or is it?
I personally would argue that it is, even though the whole premise of Uranian astrology is to be a break away from the from some of the errors of traditional astrology or from some of the superstition of traditional astrology. But I would argue that it is a subset of traditional astrology because there are two types of traditional astrology. There's traditional astrology that deals with the houses. So the first house represents you, and the second house represents your money, and the third house represents your siblings, and the fourth house represents your father, and blah blah blah. There's that version of traditional astrology that deals with the houses, planets in houses, planets that rule the houses. That's one type. And then there's another section of traditional astrology that deals with just the planets. So Venus means love, and Mercury means intellect, and the sun means father, and the moon means the mother, and Mars means passion. And so there's another type of astrology, which is also very ancient, and that's where we use the planets to represent these universal concepts. And Uranian astrology is basically a version of astrology that uses the planets to represent these universal concepts, but it does it in a very new and unique way that we haven't really specifically done before in traditional astrology.
So to find out your chart with Uranian astrology, you would still put in your birth information, but would you would just remove the signs that are associated where the planets are in relation? So like if your Venus is, okay, we're talking about Venus and Leo. If your Venus is in Leo, would you just drop the Leo and just see where Venus was in its position and where in the, does it use houses or no?
No houses whatsoever.
Okay. So it just go by the degree and the minute and the second.
It would go by the degree, the minute, the second. And there's a particular thing that we use in Uranian astrology called a dial. And so instead of putting your chart in the traditional pizza pie chart with the 12 slices, we put it on a dial, which is more interactive because then you can turn the dial, we get to move the dial, we get to see different interactions between planets that we wouldn't be able to see with our naked eye. So it's a fascinating tool using the dial. And today, luckily, we can do it using a computer program, a software, whereas back in the day, people would have to like cut out their dial and like hand print it and write the planets on it and then turn it. Today, we have an actual dial that's just a computer software, and it allows us to see different interactions between planets that we would never be able to see using a purely traditional astrology method.
Would you recommend? Is it on your site to find your chart in that sense, or is it like your deist, or how would
Well,
you
I,
recommend?
I think the best thing would be for someone to reach out to someone who practices Uranian astrology because
Thank
it's
you.
because like me, but or anyone. I mean, there's many people I think who practice Uranian astrology, and because it's not the same as you could go on some websites and put in your birth information and then it tells you your sun in Leo means this, or your Mercury in Cancer means this, or your Venus in Scorpio means this. It's not that type of planet and sign astrology. It's really your sun is forming a particular relationship to Mars, and Venus is at the middle of that relationship, and therefore the sun, Mars, and Venus means this. And
Okay.
so it's a more comprehensive astrological insight into yourself. But I don't think that you could like generate a report about it. I think you actually have to like, let someone
Okay.
put your charts in the dial and tell you what it means.
Okay. Okay. In a way, it seems like it's a simplified version of doing astrology because you don't have to deal with, not that you have to deal with, I don't mean it like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's less information to focus on in regards to the signs and the nodes
Mm-hmm.
and the houses. You're just basically focusing with Uranian astrology on just the planets,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly.
And how would you describe planetary movement, the energy? How does it relate to an individual? So you have planets, we have all, and you work with all 10 planets, right?
Yes, yes, I do.
Okay. I have to ask because sometimes it could be just the 7 and people don't pay
Mm-hmm.
attention to the last 3.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's just the characteristics of these planets in relation to who you are, or the
Mm-hmm.
energies, not really the characteristics. The characteristics come more from the signs, correct? That's the
And
right word I'm using? It's probably not the right word.
yeah, I mean the signs are really, it depends on what type of astrology you practice. In modern astrology, there's this notion of the signs of the zodiac being all important, and that's never been the case in astrology for, you know, 4,000 years of astrological practice. We don't really have a tradition in astrology of people interpreting my moon is in Aquarius and therefore it means this, or my Mars is in Cancer and therefore it means this, or my, we just don't have that. And that only started to happen in the early 1900s because of people like Evangeline Adams and because of people like Alan Leo and those astrologers who just didn't know, they just didn't have access to anything from a traditional perspective. And so, and what am I saying with this? And so the signs of the zodiac only become this hugely important thing within the early 1900s. Before that, astrology was completely about the planets. Everything was about the planets and what do the planets concretely mean and what do the planets concretely do. And so, yeah, the signs, I don't practice astrology based on the signs of the zodiac, so I don't really ever have much
Okay.
to say about it, really.
Well, it's interesting too because I do see with the planetary energy and in relation to the signs, we see where they line up, right? You got Mars
Mhm.
and Pluto for Scorpio, and Aquarius is Saturn and Uranus. It's just
Mhm.
like um, if it's just those planets themselves that you need, then that's probably all what you need to know because
Mhm.
it's what fuels us, I guess, the planets. It's what
Mhm.
motivates us. It's what moves us to do things,
Mhm.
or how our life is directed.
Mhm.
And we're always looking at, the planets where they are each day, less so than the signs. But I do feel, um, to put the moon into some of the signs, like the sun and the moon, just me personally, I kind of
Mhm.
feel like those signs in particular come in a little bit handy because it focuses on the characteristics of these signs. So some people who are a moon in Taurus, you see
Mhm.
some of these characteristics that's like, yeah, they do have the traits of that Taurian energy,
Mhm.
where it's very grounded and they're very secure with where they are, in their
Mhm.
home, so on and so forth. But,
Mhm.
but everything else, I could see where it could sort of be played, a little bit where you don't need the signs. I don't know if
Mhm.
that makes sense or not.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Definitely.
I'm doing a series right now, funny enough, where I'm just focusing on the planets. I'm going
Mhm.
through the sun, the moon. I'm going to go through all 10 planets, making slight reference to the astrological signs, but I want to focus more on the planetary energy. And
Mhm.
so it's now knowing what Uranian and astrology is. This now definitely has me more interested because it's what I'm going to be talking about for the next couple of months.
Awesome.
So that works really nicely. So I'm gonna
Mhm.
look into that, and I'm gonna reach out to you about that.
Awesome. Awesome. Please do.
Will do. Okay, so we have all these different terms. Um, we have horary, which is time-centered readings, and I believe that's just when someone asks you a question at that moment.
Mhm.
That's how you determine,
Mhm.
the reading for someone. You
Mhm.
timestamp it, and then you do the reading and see what happens. Is that more or
Mhm.
less
Mhm.
it?
Definitely.
Okay. Um, predictive. What's predictive and horary sort of sounds like they go somewhat hand in hand because predictive is a time-oriented,
Mhm.
reading, is it not?
It is. It is. And but horary astrology is basically the same as a tarot reading, but of astrology. So it's a tarot reading. It's divination. It's someone asks a question and you answer their question,
Mhm.
not necessarily based on any tarot cards, but based on the actual chart. And you would read the chart in the same way that you would read
Okay.
uh, the cards, basically.
Okay. Okay. So it is at that moment. And the predictive is if someone comes in with a question and they
Well,
want
well, the predictive, on the other hand, is if somebody wants to know what's going to be happening in the future, basically. So someone could say, "Hey, I want you to take a look at my year ahead, and I want you to tell me what's coming up in my life in the year ahead." And so we could do that sort of work.
okay. But nothing specific as a question.
It doesn't need a specific question. It's just that there are things that happens within our lives based on some of the various astrological combinations.
Yes.
And so we could just look in the future and say what's going to come up astrologically and how it plays out in the actual physical world.
Okay. Okay. There are a list of other names here. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but there's evolutionary astrology, there's esoteric astrology.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're speaking before going live, are these more or less the forms of astrology, like evolutionary and esoteric? Are these more or less recent categories for astrology, or have they always been there, but astrologers are just picking up specifically on these types of astrology and focusing on those?
Mm-hmm. So evolutionary astrology is pretty recent. It's I don't know anything about it at all, really, but I think it came up in the 90s or something, and I'm definitely not an evolutionary astrologer, and I so there's a line between traditional astrology and modern astrology, and the only terms that belong in traditional astrology are, you might hear people talk about Babylonian astrology or Arabic astrology or Hellenistic astrology or medieval astrology or
Hmm.
Renaissance astrology, but those are the traditional astrology schools. And then there are the branches of all traditional astrology, which would be horary, electional, natal, and mundane.
Yes.
Those are the four branches of astrology. But all of these other things, evolutionary astrology and esoteric astrology and any other type of astrology, is a modern invention.
Okay.
I just don't know. I just
Okay.
don't know anything about them.
It's probably now the next generation of astrology that's that's
Mhm.
like in the making. You know, it's
Mhm.
just people are like I was saying earlier,
Mhm.
you go to these schools, you get educated, and then you find something that just kind of works in a different way. It's like, you know what, I'm going to take this and I'm going to create it my own, you
Mhm.
know. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I just wanted to get I want to get an overview because there are all
Yeah.
these terms that are out here, and I want to make certain that I understand what they're focusing on the most.
Mhm.
I have Charlie here who just states this here.
Mhm.
Evolutionary astrology is focusing on the growth of the soul and past lives. There you have it. Or how do you feel?
I mean, it's interesting, but we don't have a context within our Western astrological anything at all regarding reincarnation and astrology. So the reason why I don't like evolutionary astrology is because it is completely, to a large degree, something that one man by, by the name of Jeffrey Wolf Green made up. And he made it up because he traveled to India and he saw and heard a lot of the things that the Indian astrologers were doing. And he was like, okay, well, if they are doing this there, then let me just take it from them and transplant it onto Western astrology, which is really reckless because Western astrology is very similar to Indian astrology, but they're similar in completely different ways. And you can't transplant an Indian concept such as reincarnation onto Western astrology because the Indians have had 4,000 years of an unbroken astrological practice. We have not had 4,000 years of an unbroken astrological practice. Reincarnation is at the bedrock of Indian religion, Hinduism. Reincarnation is not at the bedrock of Western anything. So to I I studied Indian astrology, I studied Jyotish, and I respect it a great deal, and I respect it too much to have some man from America
Yeah.
tell me what Western astrology should be based on his brief stint in the East. And
Mhm.
that's largely what evolutionary astrology is for me. I and it's a very simplified version of astrology. I mean, it really, once again, I think this goes back to the whole language around the signs of the zodiac. When you focus on an astrology that's only based on the signs of the zodiac, then of course you could teach that to someone in a weekend, or of course you could teach that in a month or however long, and then you could hang your shingle up and say that you're an astrologer afterwards. But astrology is a very technical field, and evolutionary astrology isn't,
Okay.
because it is created to be quick and to be very easily accessible and to be something that people could automatically sink their teeth into. And so all they talk about is your south node means this, or your north node means this, and your Pluto position means this. And if you're only focusing or reading around where somebody's north node and their Pluto position is, then I mean, sure, it's going to be easy. Sure, the majority of people are going to gravitate towards it because it takes no cognitive effort to understand it at all.
Mm.
So, I mean, everybody has their own opinion, but I do think that in the 21st century, when we do have a lot more knowledge than we had back in the 90s when they were coming up with evolutionary astrology, I think that it behooves us as a community to study because I mean, anyway, I have thoughts clearly, but
Yeah.
everybody can do what they want to do. But I think that's a part of the problem with astrology today. Everybody's doing what they want to do,
Yeah.
and no one knows why they're doing it, and no one knows how those things connect back to the
Yeah.
actual roots of actual astrology. And so we end up with everybody making their own system of
Yeah.
astrology. We end up with everybody being an evolutionary astrologer, because for a lot of people, that's the easiest way to become an astrologer. But when you can become something too easily, I think that should tell you that there's something off about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. There's more work that needs to be done. And I'm always, I'm not like stamping my hand on the table, but I'm just
Mhm,
like, for readers, people who are new to the craft, anything metaphysical, tons of books that are out there right now. Okay.
mhm,
Do your research. I think what's really important is when you're looking to explore something,
mhm,
and I have to agree with this person, I cannot remember who said this. If you want to see where the influence of that book is coming from, the sources, go to the bibliography. And if
mhm,
they're only pulling resources from stuff that's just like maybe 10 years old or
mhm.
whatnot, it's me personally, just my opinion, they're not going all the way back. I'm a traditionalist, so when I get a book, I wanna see stuff that they're going back 30, 40, 50, 60 years.
Mhm,
They're pulling information that they can tie around from maybe, the apex of when a certain practice was, at
mhm,
its highest or maybe even beforehand, and seeing how it grew and how it's changed to where it is now instead of like, this is this is modern tarot.
mhm,
It involves this. There's nothing wrong with that, but I do see a pattern when I look through these books or hearing people speak about certain styles. They're not doing all the research, they're not going all the way back. And I feel that they are missing out a very important part of their practice because
mhm.
by doing so, they're not doing their practice fully. They're just going to what's there. They go to the bookstore, they go to what's being recommended, so on and so forth, which is fine. You need to have some guidance, but you also need to do the research yourself. Remember,
Mhm.
as students in whatever school or course we're taking, the teacher is the guide. What we take from it after we leave is entirely up to us. And so if
Yeah.
you have a good teacher and they tell you to do the research and what to look at,
Mhm.
um, you got someone who really cares about the students because they want them to really know what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm going to put this comment up here for you.
Okay.
I also very much agree with that, especially with social media. I see so many people teaching what they feel is astrology, and they really don't even know the fundamentals of it.
Mhm.
For example,
Mhm.
so many. Um, let's see here, Miss Pomona. Hi, Michelle Marie, Astrological Tarot. She does astrology, and her background's in Vedic astrology.
Mm. Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
And there's hi, Michelle Marie. If you have any questions to ask, feel free to do so. This is Mychal A.Bryan. So feel free to ask away, anyone here.
Mhm.
We still have a little bit of time, and I know I was a bit heavy-handed with focusing on Michael's background, but I'm just now getting to know him, so I wanted to get some more
Mhm.
information about Michael, where he came from, to his practice. So thank you, and I appreciate the honesty in all this because we need to voice out, what we feel is in the best interest for someone who is practicing this. There's some
Mhm.
people who feel Hellenistic astrology is very right for them. They work with
Yeah.
this whole sign systems and whatnot. Um, you have a book. Okay,
I
let's see
do.
your book. This is your first one or second?
This is my first book. This is called Mastering Traditional Astrology. Let me see if I
Can you
pull
turn it sideways? I want people to see how, no, the other way. Let's see
it.
those
Oh,
pages. Look at it.
it's huge. It's actually huge.
That's Michael's mind.
Yeah, it's
Look at
it,
that.
yeah, it's a great book. It's a great read, and so this is basically, so I teach in my school, Oraculos School of Astrology, and this is the first 2 months of education that I feel an astrologer should know. And so this is 2 months worth of information. This follows the exact same curriculum I teach from, and everything I think a student should know within that first 2 months of study is in this book. And the next book that I'm working on is what I think a student should know in their next 2 months of study, because every semester at my school is 4 months long. So this is the foundations of that. Then the next 2 months, I teach horary astrology, which is the current book I'm writing right now, which I do need to put the pedal to the metal in terms of getting that out of the way. But I've let the summer drag on, and here we are, and I still haven't finished it yet. But it will be out by November.
Oh, so soon?
So soon.
Wow.
So soon. I mean, because I'm writing books. They're written in the classroom for the classroom, and I teach all year long. So every time I teach, so I just finished teaching the horary course. So I'm putting all of those notes together and compiling them into a book form. So the book is already finished. We're currently in the editing phase of it and going back and reading everything from cover to cover, and we're 1/3 done with that, but we still have the final 2/3 to go, and then I have to send it off to my friends for them to take a look at it, for them to read it and give me their feedback on it, and then I'm gonna have to do their feedback. I mean, I've learned so much. I self-published this book, which is really one of my happiest, personal victories. That thank you so much.
Yes.
I self-published this book,
Yay.
and it's doing very, very well. I think that as a new book, it's been selling extremely well, especially as a self-published author. And basically, I now know so much more about self-publishing a book than I knew a year ago. So even though the book itself is finished, I know all of the other background steps that have to happen in order for the book to completely be ready to be sold. And so I'm not as enthusiastic anymore as I used to be, because back in the day being last year, I thought I was finished 1,000 times, and then there was always one more thing and another thing and another thing and another thing. So I'm kind of holding the lid on like release dates and things now, because I know that even though the book is done, there are
Mhm.
1,000 other things that have to be done before it's ready to be in book form, like this.
There you go. And you're happy with it.
I'm so happy with it.
Okay.
If I could die tomorrow knowing that I only left the world this one book, because it's the book I would have wanted when I first came into astrology, and it is a thorough book, and it's a comprehensive book. And I know that if a person were to read this book from cover to cover and understand the content of it, they would have all they need in order to begin a lifetime of astrological practice.
In your book, in that book, how many years are we looking at of knowledge?
Well, I mean, so once again, it's my first book, so it's pretty much my entire lifetime of practice. And if I came into practice in 2005, so I guess whatever that
Years.
almost,
18.
yeah, yeah.
18.
And and it's not just astrology. It is just astrology, but it's talking about how all of the other parts of the Western mystery tradition have fed into our astrology as well. So it's really one of a kind, and there really is nothing else like it that exists anywhere at all.
Yeah, I put the link. I don't know if it's working. Do you see it on YouTube, Michael, if the link is working? Is it
So I'm
published?
so I'm not on YouTube, and only because I didn't want to have the background, um,
Okay.
the background feedback.
Okay. It's totally fine. Let me if can someone test for me if that link is working? I just copied and pasted from the description. So if someone can test the link that I put in, you could purchase it through your website, or is it only through Amazon?
Through Amazon.
It is
Amazon
through
is
Amazon.
yeah.
Okay.
The link on my website takes people back to Amazon.
Okay. All righty. I'm going to post this here. Oh, Charlie asked if you can put this in maybe 2 sentences. How long have you studied astrology and what piqued your interest in it when you first started?
So we were talking about that earlier. So
Yeah, she came in later.
I came into astrology around 12, around the age of 12, and that was astrology, tarot, Kabbalah, numerology, all of that happened within that same year, I think. And and just wanting to do magic and be a part of a magical world is really why I got into astrology to begin with.
Okay. Um, I'm typing something here very
Mhm.
quickly. Um, Let me put in this comment here from Pomona. With so many channels and paths of astrology, Michael, which do you feel is more accurate? I feel like it's becoming like religion with many offshoots.
hmm I think that's a very great question. So at the moment, what I was doing before we came on this call was a blind chart reading marathon, and I'm actually going to give you the link, or I'll paste the link into our StreamYard, and then I mean you could share the link with the listeners. But I'm doing a blind chart reading marathon, and basically that is me showing what astrology looks like on the spot. So so I just put that in the StreamYard link. Do you see that, Amy?
It's not going to work in the StreamYard. It has to be through YouTube.
Okay. Okay, well, go on. Oh, I'm very technologically unsavvy, which is why, I don't know
um,
anything at all. But I'll find it.
okay, I was going to say, yeah, if you're able to go on that YouTube
Yes,
and
yes,
just
yes, yes,
mute,
yes. I'm going to do that right now.
yeah.
But
Um,
so what I was saying about it was that I'm doing this blind chart reading marathon because I think that that's the best way uh how to show people astrology. Oh, okay, let me pause that. Sorry. I think the best way to show people astrology in action is actually by demonstrating the astrology. And so that is what I'm doing for the next 6 days. So if you want to come and see astrology in action, please do come, and you can bring your chart. And I mean, even though it's a pretty full room of people, I may just read your chart so you can come and check it out. And the reason why I said that is because I think, as far as astrology is concerned, the proof is in the pudding. And if a person is willing to read a chart on the spot without having any background information about that person at all, then I think that whatever that person does is probably something that is accurate, because
mm,
astrologers don't really believe in putting their career on the line by reading a person's chart without having any background information, which is why so often when we see people saying that they can do that, they first start by asking the client 10,000 questions. So by the time as it comes to them actually giving the reading, they already know 10,000 things about that client.
yeah.
But what I'm doing in these blind chart readings is the absolute opposite of that. I'm just taking the chart and giving the reading, and that is absolutely it. So, that being said, I practice traditional astrology, but my version of traditional astrology, rooted in the Renaissance, because after you know traditional astrology, you can do anything, and it doesn't work the other way around. A modern astrologer can't do anything in astrology because modern astrology has many offshoots and branches, and no one knows why they practice what branch of modern astrology they practice, because it's weird. It's a very weird, wild astrological world. But if
Mm,
you know traditional astrology, you can practice anything else that astrology has to offer. So I would always say that people start from traditional astrology because that is the one key that opens all the doors.
mhm.
When I was thinking about going back to school, and I was talking to a doctor about my medical school aspirations, and I said to him, medical school is pretty intense. I don't think that I want to spend the next 15 years of my life in school trying to become this doctor, because I still don't even know what the reason is behind why I would want to become a doctor. So I said, instead of doing something that intense, I'm just going to go to acupuncture school, because I know that that is also intense, but it's not as intense as becoming a board certified surgeon.
Mhm.
And he said to me, Michael, do not go to acupuncture school. He said, because for what you want, you need the key that opens every door. And the only key that does that within the medical fraternity is if you yourself are a medical doctor. And granted, I mean, there are many ways to, skin the cat, but at the end of the day, that's kind of true, because an acupuncturist can't really prescribe in the same way that a medical doctor can prescribe.
Yeah.
A chiropractor can't perform surgery in the way that a medical doctor can perform surgery. And I mean, the list just goes on and on. And for me, I would have wanted the key that opens every door. And traditional astrology is the key that opens every door. It will help you with your modern astrology practice if that's what you want to do. But modern astrology will never help you with traditional astrology if that's what you want to do.
It's going to the roots. It's going to, yeah, plain and simple.
Mm-hmm.
Plain and simple, because you'll get more opportunities. We hear it like in the job market, someone who has a PhD versus a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
PhD may get it. Sometimes, they're overqualified, but if it comes to a situation like that, they'll go with that person who has that experience, and hopefully they will get placed in a position that will shine their skills, not put their skills below them. You want to utilize the experience fully. So yeah, I agree 100% wholeheartedly. You got to go back to those roots. You got to understand where everything goes. What's happening here is not necessarily law, because there's something that got to this point to where we are right now. Education, so on and so forth. So we got to look back. I want to share this here with Astrological Tarot. Does your book cover comparisons between different avenues, cultural understandings, or different avenues of astrology, such as cultural understandings?
One of the things that I do in my book that hasn't been done by anyone ever in at least the 20th or 21st century is I take a look. There's an entire chapter dedicated to the Hermetic roots of astrology. And in that chapter, even though it's talking about Hermeticism on the surface, it really takes a look at all of the various cultural influences, especially some of the ancient Greek influences on philosophy, and not just the ancient Greek influences on philosophy, but I also look at a little bit of Eastern influences on philosophy and the alchemical movement of the medieval period, and how alchemy has fed into our understanding of astrology, and how just understanding about the cosmos from a classical perspective has fed into our understanding of astrology. So I don't look at different cultures. I'm not looking at Africa and China and the Bahamas and whatever in terms of how they feel into astrology, but I am looking at the direct things, the direct cultural, philosophical, spiritual roots that all tie into the form of the astrology that we practice today.
Okay. I am putting in your link, 2 links, the website and then the one. Whoops, sorry, I just replied to you. Wait a second, it's just so bad. Hang on a second, let's do this here. So everyone, this is the link that I wanted to share for Michael's real-time astrology readings. We'll just leave it like that. It's right at the bottom. So I think, again, if you're going to do an astrology book, it's you need to put some historical context. You don't open the book and go, okay, planet, sign, so on and so forth. We want to understand, it's not like the astrology for dummies. Or you got to start somewhere.
To astrology. One of the things that I specifically chose not to do was, so even though there is that section in the book called the Hermetic philosophy of the pre-cosmos or something like that, even though there is that one chapter that really goes into talking about the philosophy and the it's really just about the philosophy and the different contributors to that philosophy over thousands of years and what they said and what they gave. My background is in writing. I went to school. My degree is in writing, and so I didn't want to create a boring historical, retelling of what every single person did and what every single person said, because there's a trend that's occurring within a lot of astrological literature now, and it is to write the entire history of classical astrology from the very first Babylonian who stood on top of the very first temple and who looked out at the night sky, all the way up to the end of the classical period. And I had no intention of writing that sort of book, because I feel like one of the things that happens in the astrological community is that people astrologers write books to impress their colleagues. And I feel as a teacher, as someone who teaches within several modalities, I feel as if that's probably the most ridiculous thing to do. And it's also the most insensitive thing to do, to write a book to impress your other colleague who already is a professional astrologer. So
Mhm.
you're writing this book and sounding all hoi polloi and larger than life because you're giving a Harvard level scholarly research on every movement of astrology since the year zero up until the end of the medieval period, when in fact that isn't helpful for a person who wants to learn astrology. So, because other books have done that, I've specifically chosen not to do that because I think it's a very stupid thing to do. I think it's a very unthoughtful thing to do. And I think that it doesn't actually take the reader into consideration. So, what I've done in this book is I start by exploring what is astrology, and then I really dive into the things that I think every astrologer needs to know in order to practice the astrology well. And the philosophy chapter is great if that's what you want, but you could skip that and go back to the larger practical content of the book because this book is designed for people who want to become professional astrologers. It is a student manual.
Mhm. I think that's good too. You need to that you keep that in mind. The attention level of people who are reading, and especially when it comes to a topic like this. Um, and I've done this before. I've gotten a book that's just so fascinating. It's filled with information. I go, okay, chapter one, read the forward and whatnot. And it just starts going on and on and on. And I'm like, you know what? Let me just kind of go through the index and just
Mhm,
find the topic that I'm looking for. I just kind of go right back into it. And
mhm,
I think it's nice to have a book that gives you that freedom to kind of jump around a little bit. It's like, okay, you can read a little bit about the history, but if you want to get to the nooks and crannies, you can
mhm,
jump right to that section, and it's written in such a way that it'll engage you. You'll get the information, but it'll also get you wanting to go back to the beginning because you're starting to
mhm,
understand what the main context is. It's like, okay,
mhm,
now let me go back to where I skipped or the part that I
mhm,
wasn't interested in.
mhm.
I think it should be cohesive in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's a once again, it I think the book only makes sense if someone feels like they want to be a professional astrologer. And I mean, it definitely I'm currently teaching a course at Kepler College. Kepler College was the first college that was recognized by a state in America to offer a bachelor's degree program in astrology and or to offer a degree program in astrology. I'm not
Mm,
sure if it was a bachelor's, but I know that they offered a degree in astrology. And so this is the textbook for the course that I'm currently teaching. And it makes so much sense for the students when I'm actually guiding them through the book. But I wrote it so that it could make sense for a person on their own as well. But that person has to want to be a professional astrologer. I think that's the only realm within which a person would sit down and read through 647 pages of any book if they genuinely feel as if this is the path they want to follow, they want to be a professional astrologer, then this is the book that I think they need to really put all of the pieces together, especially in the first months of them learning astrology.
mm. It's not a reference book.
It's not a reference book.
Yeah, it's not a reference book.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to put one more here from Michelle Marie.
Hmm.
Interesting. I find myself explaining Vedic astrology from a Western astrology perspective before I can bridge the concept with a new American, Canadian, or Euro client. My Indian clients jump right in.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, I think that I mean, I love Jyotish. I love Vedic astrology because I've studied. All of my teachers have been from India, living in India, and there's a very specific orientation that they have to the real world that I think is very different from the orientation that we have in the West and the orientation that a lot of Western clients have. because my Indian clients, they want to know, should I sell my house to my brother? And will my brother have enough money to pay for the house? And they want to know, should I continue making this investment in
Mm.
this thing that my wife told me to make an investment in? And they want to know about things that are pragmatic and things that are concrete, and I mean, things that apply to their daily life. And I enjoy clients like that because it forces me to be a better astrologer when I can look at somebody's chart and tell them, no, it doesn't look like your brother has the money to pay for the house, because even though he has high hopes and expectations, he really isn't operating from the most stable place. And then to hear that person say, yeah, that's exactly what I thought, but I didn't know how to see that in my own chart. So to be able to say that to someone from their chart, I think is a fascinating thing. And and that is the orientation of Indian astrology. It is pragmatic, it is concrete, it is event based, and it doesn't really dwell within all of the fuzzy areas that I think a lot of Western astrology, a lot of modern Western astrology uh, dwells in today.
Mhm. I know Michelle Marie of Astrological Tarot, and I had her as a guest on my channel quite a few years ago. And she was explaining Vedic astrology. It is very complex. We have the chart that looks very simple, the way it's structured. It's not a wheel, it's like a rectangle of sorts.
Hmm.
But then it goes into, I can't remember. Oh no, Michelle Marie, you know exactly what I'm trying to say. It
Hmm.
goes into different levels, like
Hmm.
of the soul, how it goes through all these different stages, and how it deals with uh, hardship, how it deals with happiness. It's and I had no idea. There's like 50 of these different tiers. I'm just like, wow, that
Hmm.
is amazing. But if I'm putting words in your mouth, Michelle Marie, let me know. But she feels for her it is the most accurate for her when it comes to doing really readings for
Hmm.
guiding someone during their journey. Because from what I'm getting, it seems like it puts in a lot more information that she can get versus
Hmm.
Western astrology.
I think that that is, I mean, within Geotish there are the various divisional charts that can be casted. So there's the Navamsha chart, there's the Dwadashamsha chart, there's all of these divisional divisional charts, and they all have a different purpose in terms of exploring various components of a person's life. However, actual traditional Western astrology is just as deep and just as complex. And the problem is that most people don't know how to practice actual traditional Western astrology. Traditional Western astrology holds the same sorts of things that are important to it. I can't remember what that word is, principles or ideals, but traditional Western astrology holds the same values as traditional Indian astrology. And if you're comparing traditional Indian astrology to modern Western evolutionary astrology, then of course it's going to be like comparing apples and cow manure, because
So different.
traditional Indian astrology is a mammoth of a wonderful thing, and modern Western, I don't want to say evolutionary astrology, but modern Western astrology is really, it looks stupid and it looks childish in comparison. But if you're practicing traditional Western astrology as it is, then the two of them basically look the same: traditional Indian astrology and traditional Western astrology,
Mm,
and they both have the same result. But you can't compare modern evolutionary, esoteric, spiritual, theosophical astrology, archetypal modern astrology to traditional Indian astrology, because the Western version will always fail in that comparison. You have to
mm,
compare things that are equivalent. And traditional Western astrology, whether it's traditional Western medieval, traditional Western Renaissance, traditional Western Hellenistic, traditional Western Babylonian, traditional Western astrology is the only thing that can be compared to traditional Indian astrology.
okay, I think we're done, everyone. I think we got what we needed. I I mean, this is what I think a lot of us who are exploring astrology, whether, just to know the history behind it or just to better understand it, we need to hear more of. We need to clarify these different techniques and their meanings and how they work in some aspects and how they may not be great in others. So I think it's so important to have someone like you. And that's why I asked the questions that I did for you, because I feel like, considering 640 something pages,
Hmm.
that you have an understanding of these various systems, and how now I feel educated in knowing that these terms of evolutionary, predictive, even I think horary is
Horror. Hmm.
horary is part of modern astrology, not traditional. Or
Well,
is
well, well,
horary
well,
part?
well, horary astrology is one of the most ancient branches
Okay,
of astrology. So yes,
okay,
evolutionary astrology is modern, esoteric astrology is modern, archetypal astrology is modern, psychological astrology is modern, but horary astrology is one of the most
okay,
ancient forms of astrology we have.
okay. Thank you for correcting that. So
Hmm.
I can put that in a separate.
Hmm.
Keep it simple. One word. It's astrology. And make it so much easier.
If only.
If only. And as these spiritual practices that are out there, there's going to be subcategories of them. Like I was saying earlier, that we're going to see different shifts. They're going to be renamed. They're going to be generational. They're going to give witchcraft maybe a different name and just call it, I don't know, something else. I'm not going to be here to see it, so I'm going to
Hmm.
stick with what we have here, and that's going to be good enough.
Hmm.
Okay, so Michael, I know we're running out of time here. I mentioned something, but you put clarity on this, so I don't know how you feel about talking about this.
Hmm.
Um, but
Well, not overwhelmingly. I mean, the signs are valuable, especially within a traditional context. So I do work with them as much as it's necessary from a traditional perspective, but I don't do what a lot of people who you'd see on the internet do in terms of interpreting Venus and Leo as being a specific definition of something. But I could answer the question.
okay. Well, basically, let's just do it. It's going to work or it's not. I had mentioned to you that this week, the last few days, um, we went, Venus went retrograde in
Hmm.
Leo when the sun moved into Leo, I believe.
Hmm.
I don't know if you have the information there. So a
Hmm.
few days ago, we lost Sinead O'Connor. She's Sagittarius. She's fiery, very, very strong, but went through a lot of issues. And I did some live readings today, and a lot of the people I was doing readings for were people in Sagittarius. So I'm sorry, this is going to end up being signs. But it seemed to be that I was seeing a pattern that the readings for the people I was doing, specifically Sagittarius, that they were feeling a lot of hurt. They
Hmm.
were feeling like loss. They were feeling like there was something, they were like on a roll, and then something just kind of changed energetically. And
Hmm.
so I'm wondering, and when you do a reading, do you
Hmm.
see patterns that are going on, let's say at a global level, like news events? Do we start seeing patterns that could be happening globally, also affecting people, but specifically with the signs and the planets that are in their chart?
Hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense if I
It,
worded
it,
it
it,
out.
it does. And I think that, I mean, if you have your sun in any sign at all, the sun is one of the, from a traditional perspective, the sun is one of the 5 points that we call a giver of life. So the sun is one of the 5 givers of life. And the traditional term for that is high legical. So we say that the sun is one of the 5 high legical points. And so if you have a major transit or aspect to the sun in your birth chart, that is going to say something major going on within your life in general. So if those people all had their sun within a particular degree or a particular range of degrees, and there was a major transit to that area, then you could feel that collectively.
Okay.
And I think just because of the type of work I do, I would prefer to see the chart of the person, what's going on specifically within their chart, because the every transit isn't going to affect everyone in the same way. Some people have a Jupiter transit, for example. We know that universally Jupiter is one of the benefic planets, and Jupiter is a lord of abundance and luck and a bringer of fortune and all of these things. But not everybody experiences a Jupiter transit in that way. Some people might be very Saturnian people. They might be very dour and very serious and very played by the book and very stubborn and strong and stern and pessimistic about life. So when they have a Jupiter transit, it might suck for them. Whereas the person who is a very Jupiterian, happy-go-lucky, very optimistic, very upward-thinking person, when they have a Jupiter transit, that might be the best moment in the world for them.
Yeah.
So we really have to take a look at people's charts individually to see what's going on that's really affecting them as specifically as it is. However, in general, I think that different people can be very sensitive to the astrological weather that's going on. And I think that astrological weather can greatly impact people, especially if they are in a state already where they're sensitive to the feelings of those
Yeah.
influences.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. We got absolutely right across the board here. But
Mhm.
because there are, when I do readings with the cards and I bring in some of the influences, I tell people that, take a look, and going back to the signs, take a look at your sun, moon, and rising signs, because I still
Mhm.
feel that those could play an influence
Mhm.
into you.
Mhm.
And also the elements. I work a lot with elements, fire, earth,
Mhm.
or water. And so I feel those aspects come into play. So if it's very heavy, if it's been a very heavy week for you,
Mhm.
um, I tell people if they have their chart, look and see where the Saturnian energy is, what's
Mhm.
going on at that time, and see if maybe it's just a little bit more
Mhm.
intense for this week or for the coming days. So
Yeah.
that's how I relate to the planets when it comes to doing the readings with the tarot. It's like, is it more
Mhm.
on the heavier side? Is it more on the light side? What do we
Mhm.
need to come and bring in for influence? What do we need to bring into balance?
Yeah.
That's sort of how I try to guide them,
Mhm.
so that they can, do the research themselves and see what they can do to amplify the energy so they can get out of that situation.
Mhm.
You know,
Definitely.
I think it makes it so much more.
Mhm.
I did have another question. I don't know time wise if we should just stop and I can talk to you about this offline.
I mean, sure, you can ask me while we're here.
Okay. Okay. So I posted a question on Michael's channel,
Mhm.
Oraculos Podcast. I put the link there. Um, I asked when it came to doing a chart, and let's just speak from your experience, the Uranian chart or Uranian astrology. Someone who is adopted, me,
Mhm.
biological parents versus adoptive parents. How do you read a chart where there are two parents involved, one that birthed, created, and then the other one that raised the child?
Within so okay, so I think there are two pieces to this because I think that the original question had to do with the time of birth, and or was that your question, or did you also
Mhm.
ask that question as well about the time of birth and if a person didn't have their time of birth, or was this?
No, this was specifically about
Got
having two different parents, because the time of birth is what it is. It's the time
it?
that you're born.
So within a chart, and so Uranian astrology for me is an adjunct to my actual traditional astrological practice. So I'm a traditional astrologer first and foremost, and a Uranian astrologer secondly. And so within the chart, from a traditional perspective, your parents, as you know them, are going to show up within your fourth house and your 10th house. The fourth house is the house of the father, the 10th house is the house of the mother. The rule of the fourth house represents your father as you knew him. The rule of the 10th house represents your mother as you knew her. So those are the people who are going to show up within your chart when you cast a chart about my parents, or when you look at the birth chart about the parents. Those are the people, the parents who you knew are going to be the people who show up in your chart, not the parents who birthed you if you had no relationship to them.
Okay. Yeah, because when I look at my chart, I can see in the 10th house. I don't reveal too much
Mm-hmm.
information on my chart on
Mm-hmm.
publicly, but I see in the 10th house where that can come as an influence, and I can mention that to you offline.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the fourth house is sort of interesting though, because I was raised with loving parents,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that plays a part into my chart as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I just can't help but think biologically if there
Mm-hmm.
could have been some influence into that as well. Because I know
Mm-hmm.
you are a product of your environment. We have the DNA as to who we are, how we think, see, so on and so forth. And when we get entered into a environment, um, that DNA will be influenced, it will be shifted, it will be altered. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering by how much of a degree the influence of where we were raised plays an influence versus the DNA, which is more or less set within us.
I think the reality of astrology is that it's only going to describe to you the life that you knew, not the life that you didn't know. And so if you had no relationship with a particular um, if you had no relationship with someone, that person isn't really going to show up within your chart, because the reason why a chart reading feels so familiar is because it describes to us the life that we knew. And so if for you there was confusion or lack of clarity surrounding your birth parents or something to that effect, then that's going to show up within your chart as well. But in general, if you are just looking at your chart from the perspective of saying to someone, hey, describe my mom and dad to me, chances are the mom and dad they're going to describe to you are going to be the parents who you knew, not the parents who you didn't know. Similarly, with the seventh house, you say to someone, describe to me my spouse. Chances are the spouse who your seventh house within your birth chart describes to you is going to be the most impactful relationship that you've had, not necessarily the trifles that occurred along the way. It's going to be the big relationship that really set the stage for all other relationships to follow. That's the relationship that's going to manifest
Okay.
within your birth chart.
Okay. So basically it's where you were as a child growing up that shapes your chart. It doesn't go to the DNA, it doesn't go to the previous previous parents.
When you say previous parents,
The birth parents.
the birth parents.
Yeah.
I mean, once again, if that was a major topic of discussion within your life, who are my parents versus who are the people who raised me, or who are my biological parents versus
Yeah.
who are the people who raised me, then that major point of curiosity is also going to be seen in your chart, and a good astrologer will be able to read that. Okay, so maybe there's some confusion within your life regarding the parents, or even though your parents look like they have a wonderful relationship to you, there's still a core seed of confusion within your life surrounding the
Okay.
home and your ancestry and your upbringing. So that will show up within your life. However, if that wasn't a major topic for you, and if you lived your life completely wonderfully okay, and who your biological parents wasn't a major factor for you at all, then that's not going to show up within your chart, because your
Okay.
chart shows you the life that you had.
Okay. You answered it. It's
Mhm.
my parents who raised me, just hands down.
Mhm.
It wasn't a topic of conversation on a regular basis or anything. Someone
Yeah.
says, "Oh, who are your parents?" I guess parents that raised me. Yeah.
hmm Hmm.
So,
I mean, I had a stepfather, and he shows up in my chart, and very clearly, very explicitly, I can see him,
mm,
and that's all that there is. My biological father never really had a relationship to me. I never really had a relationship to him. So when I look for my father within my chart, if I get a reading from someone and ask them to talk about my father in my chart, the only person I would ever expect them to talk about is my biological is my stepfather, because he's the only father that I ever had.
okay. Okay. So that's a good way to approach a reading when it comes to someone that you've been distant with or someone that you haven't seen in a while. It's whoever you've had the longest or the most contact with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. Last call for questions. Anyone? Michael, thank you for answering that. I know it's a
You're welcome.
personal question on my part, but
You're so welcome.
I felt fine to discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
Any last questions? Because I do not want to hold Michael up any longer. But again, I appreciate you taking the time, Michael. Um,
Definitely.
let's see the book. Let's see the book. Okay. He says it was. There's the smile. Excellent. And
So
it
the
came out just a few months ago.
Yeah, it came out in May on Amazon. It says it came out on May 9th.
Okay.
So, well, not I mean, I know it came out on May 9th, but yeah, it came out on May 9th, and it's doing quite well, and I'm very, very happy about it.
Okay.
And it's a good book. It's a solid book. If you want to learn astrology, then this is definitely the book for you. And you could read it cover to cover, but you could also read it in chunks. You could go to the signs of the zodiac if that's really where you feel best. Then you could start there. If you want to go to the houses, you could go there. If you want to go to the planets, you can go there. You could build your own adventure, or you could read it from the first page to the last page, and that would be great as well.
Okay. Excellent. Michael, you do your next live sets of readings tomorrow, right?
Tomorrow, yes. So if anybody wants to come and share their chart in that environment, you can come, and it's a complete blind reading. So you would give your chart to my assistants who are going to be helping me in the reading, and then they're going to give me the information. So I don't actually know who you are. All I know is your birth information, gender, and then I take it from there.
I think that's a wonderful exercise too for you as an
Mhm.
astrologer. It just keeps you on your toes. It keeps everything working. It's a good practice. You can still be a professional, but you still need to hone your skills. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's always good to do exercises of any sort, to keep
Mhm.
everything on top
Mm,
and get more awareness, and you
mm.
learn more from each readings.
Definitely.
Um, I
Definitely.
got here Charlie. She is excited to get the book. So appreciate that so much. Everyone go to Michael's channel. It's in the description. I've put it twice, I think, here in the chat in this time. Take a look at his website. He has a lot to offer.
Mhm.
The book, and then the next book in November. If you're a speed reader, if you could get through the first book before November, go for it. Um, and of course, his live readings that he has coming up. The next one tomorrow at what time?
Tomorrow it's going to be at 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. EDT.
Okay, so that's going to be 12 our time, Pacific Daylight, 3 o'clock
Mhm.
Michael's time, Eastern.
Mhm.
Um, British time, that is 9 o'clock, I think.
Yes, it is.
So if you are interested, go over there, show some love to Michael. Any questions, ask him. You can reach him through the website, so on and so forth. I would love to have you back, Michael.
Thank
Let's
you so much.
let's get that second book at.
I'd love to be back. Thank you so much.
All righty. Everyone, thank you again for the support. I appreciate you listening, asking questions. I will be back soon, same old, same bat channel, so on and so forth. Michael, hang tight so then we could tie up the loose ends. I'm going to hang up here in a second. And everyone, I look forward to seeing you virtually again. Again, appreciate the support. Let people know about this channel. Like, subscribe, spread the word around. Really appreciate it. Okay. Bye, everyone.